Okay, so we've got a review today of the CF Moto 800 MT, which references the Suzuki Vstrom 800D that I've got on loan. So I went up to Swindon, rode up to Swindon from here in North Devon, so it's about 150 miles on the Vstrom 800, to just take out the CF Moto from Bike Trends up in Swindon, which is a dealer where I got my Vouch from. So they said, why don't you come up and ride the CF Moto? I'd had quite a bit of inquiries about the CF Moto, people who watched the channel who said, have you ridden the CF Moto 800 yet? What do you think? So I was keen to get a go on one. Now, for anybody who's not too aware, CF Moto are in very close partnership with KTM. The 800 MT uses a 790 engine out of the KTM 790 Adventure, and the new 790 Adventure is built in the same factory by CF Moto as the 800 MT, so it's all kind of incestual, really. The thing with the 800 MT is that probably about 6 months ago, it got a massive price reduction. When it was imported by Quadzilla initially, maybe a few years ago, it came in at £11,200 or something like that, which was very close to 890 KTM territory. And it really, I would say it bombed. Nobody bought one because why would you? It's an unknown brand when you can buy a well-known brand for similar money. 6 months ago, they seemed to completely kneecap the prices, and so you could get the sport version with the cast aluminium rims for £8,500 and the touring version, which I was going to ride, for £9,199 on the road, and that came with what is an exceptional spec sheet list. It got the 95 brake horsepower engine, but then it had got the tin boxes, the 3 metal boxes including the top box. It had got cruise control, heated seat, heated grips, it had got tubeless spoked wheels. What else had it got? A TFT screen, centre stand as standard. So it had got some really good features to it, which I think is what hooked people in. It seemed to be incredible value for money. And in fairness, even against this Vstrom 800, this is £10,600, so £1,500 more money, and you get none of the spec sheet attributes that you get with the CF Moto. So very interested to ride it. It also gave me a good chance to put some miles on the Vstrom 800 in a more touring capacity, going up on the A roads to the motorway and then doing some motorway miles on this 800DE. I've got to say, as a back road bike, going across country along the A39 and that towards Bridgewater, this bike is absolutely phenomenal. The engine has got power, it's got revs, it's got character. It just always wants to go. It's got a very eager throttle. By that I mean it's very responsive, very punchy, and the suspension, as I've said in a previous video, just really works effortlessly to enable you to get the full amount of power down on the road and make progress very quickly. So I actually think it's a very good spirited bike to ride. It makes you ride faster than maybe you typically would. Brakes are good, seating position is good, bar position is good. It's just a really well resolved motorcycle for riding at a pace. On the motorway, I think my concerns about it not being a great touring bike shone through above 70, 75 miles an hour, at which point you start to get the wind buffeting going through. It's not necessarily buffeting, it's almost like having no screed at all, so the wind's coming straight at you. And there was a point where I thought, you know what, I wouldn't want to go to Scotland on this or do an extensive motorway trip, just because you would feel tired by the end of the journey. And then when you factor in the fact it's not got the tubeless spoke wheels, it's got no cruise control, you kind of think, well, I'm not sure I'd choose this as a touring bike. Interestingly, I watched Chris Northover's video of this bike for Bike World, and it was actually this exact bike that he had on loan before me. And he was using it more in an off-road environment. He took it to an enduro track. You know, Chris is an incredibly good rider, and his position on it is that he wants one to turn it into an even more capable off-road bike by shedding its weight and things like that. To me, I would go the opposite direction, and if I was to improve this bike, I would want to put on those attributes that would make it a better touring bike, such as the tubeless wheels, such as cruise control, and such as more weather protection, bigger screen and that. So you could do the miles, and then obviously still have the excitement of the back road bike that it has. For me, a 230 kilo bike off-road is still only for the realms of the very talented rider. It's not something I would want to take on an off-road journey, whether it's the ACT through the UK or into Portugal. Certainly if I was riding solo, I would want to go something smaller than this if I was using it as a dirt travel bike. So for me, I would push it more towards the touring direction. And therefore we arrived in Swindon very much enamoured with this bike, but also frustrated that Suzuki had maybe not developed it in the way that Vstrom owners expected their bikes to be developed. And then you take out the CF Moto, which, to quickly summarise, I would say is a modern day Vstrom 800. It's the bike that Suzuki should have built, but didn't build, and it's the bike that's got the attributes that the Vstrom owner would probably really like and are probably buying instead of a Vstrom. So it was actually, unintentionally, it was a very good comparison to make, so you could see why people maybe aren't buying this and maybe looking elsewhere. So I took the CF Moto out. Now, in a 2-hour test ride, you could only generate so much opinion, worthwhile opinion. And to be honest, assessing an adventure bike in a day or 2 days or 2 hours is never enough. You'll only really find out whether you like a bike, an adventure bike or not, or a bike bought for adventure after a week on the road or something like that. So you're only going to get like a little snippet of information in a 2-hour test ride. For me, that CF Moto was, to ride it, it was like a photocopied version of a European bike, i.e., and I wouldn't say badly photocopied version, but it wasn't quite as crystal clear as the original. The engine, as soon as I pulled away and went down the slick road onto the motorway, it almost felt like, it was like, I had a question mark of where is the power. For 95 horsepower, stepping off this Vstrom with 83, the CF Moto felt very lackluster, very raspy, wide, it made a lot of noise, and it made forward propulsion, but didn't give you the sense of excitement that I was getting with the Vstrom. So I was quite disappointed with that engine. And actually I pulled up with Dave. Dave is a friend who lives in Swindon. He was taking me out, showing me the local roads for 2 hours, and he happened to be on a KTM 790 Adventure. And we pulled up at the first set of lights, and I said, I'm not sure if the clutch is slipping or what, but it just seems to be making noise, but not really generating great ferocity of performance, which you would expect for a 95 brake horsepower. So it took a bit of getting used to. Handling is quite soft. The suspension, I would say, is under damp. So in corners, it doesn't settle certainly quite as well as this. I later rode the 790 Adventure at Dave's. It's a 10,000 mile example. And Dave sat and filmed me as I went up and down. And it only took a couple of minutes on that 790 to realise that the CF Moto, I know people are saying it's a KTM with a cheaper badge. It's not a KTM with a cheaper badge. It's a cheaper bike. It doesn't ride as well. The brakes aren't as good. The power delivery is not as smooth. The weight's worse off because the weight is not low down in those low tanks like you've got on the KTM. So I wouldn't, if anybody's saying, well, it's a cheap version of a KTM, no, it's not. It's a different bike, and it's not as good a bike as a KTM, and therefore you're definitely getting less of a rider's bike than you are a KTM that's going to cost you 1,500 quid more. So as a bike to ride, I wasn't overly enamoured with it. I respected it, and I could see what its appeal could be. And what I would say is when you were just wafting along at 60, 65, 70, it was perfectly effortless. You know, it covered that ground really well. It got a decent screen. You felt like you could sit for miles on a motorway in a way that you couldn't sit for miles on the motorway on the Vstrom. And so that comes to the point being that I think that is a better Vstrom. The CF Moto is a better Vstrom than the Vstrom. Because the virtues of the Vstrom have never been high-end performance. It's never been about going fast or great dynamic ability. It's been offering a bike with lots of kit, lots of capability at a lower price. And that's exactly what that CF Moto does. I don't think it matters that much that it's not as good to ride as the competition or the more established competition. The fact is, and when I got back to the dealership, there was a guy there, Dave, who just bought a CF Moto, and he was, you know, waxing lyrical about the equipment that you got with it and the price point. And I think that's its true selling point. So if you're not going to get excited by cruise control, by tubeless spoke wheels, by centre stand, by heated seat, by heated grips, there are better bikes out there. But if those sort of elements matter to you, and if you're on a budget or you like getting good value for money, I don't think there's a better bike at the minute than the CF Moto 800. It was interesting, I heard speculation that the price, this is like a cheap price to get people onto the bike, and then eventually, you know, in a year's time, they'll put it up to a more established price point over 10,000, and that to me is when that CF Moto won't make so much sense, because I don't think as a rider's bike it's good enough to justify a top side of £10,000 bike, and whether there's enough equity in the brand for people to pay that sort of money. I know there's big talk that it's in bed, you know, now it's in cahoots with KTM. It generates there's an osmosis of integrity being pulled across from KTM, which I think on the surface it does, but to ride, as I say, there's a very big difference between a KTM product and a CF Moto product. Even the engine feels different. It's the same engine, but it doesn't feel as alive, as alert, as ready to race as that KTM, so it's got a very different attribute. An attribute that's not going to be alien to anybody who's been a fan of the Vstrom over the years. The 650s and the 1000s, as I say, were never known for being an exciting ride, but they were just very good, dependable bikes, which gives us that CF Moto. So did I enjoy riding the CF Moto? Did I really like it as a motorcycle? No, I was a bit indifferent to it. I kind of thought there were better bikes out there, and I'd just arrived on a better bike. But would you buy one? Would you recommend would you recommend it to somebody who wanted a great package at a great price? Yes, absolutely, and that's why I think it's selling. It was interesting, the dealership said they'd sold 4 CF Motos to 1 Vstrom DE, and I can see why, because from a price point of view and a value point of view, this is £1,500 more, and whilst it rides a lot better, it offers you a lot less capacity for touring, for usability, centre stand, cruise control, heated grips, proper screen. The CF Moto is the better bike as an all-round purchase package. It's also got a 9,300 mile service interval, which is nearly 2,000 more than this at 7,500. The question mark over the Chinese brands is resale value. I mean, people were talking about the Benelli, and now nobody wants their 502s. The dealers won't even trade in a Chinese bike, and I can kind of understand why, because certainly in the last few years they've come on strong, but they've still not got that reputation for being easy to sell. And so I think CF Moto could be the turning point. Certainly now they're in bed with KTM, it could be the turning point at which Chinese manufacturers who have come under their own brand and who are trying to establish their own brand, could be the point at which they get the reputation to be taken seriously, which will improve resale value. Who knows? But I think at the price point that it is, it's worth that gamble. Also at the dealership was the Benelli TRK 702 that I'd tested a few weeks back. Now, if it was me looking for a good value, usable bike for touring on, I'd probably save my money and get the Benelli. I thought the engine in that Benelli was less powerful than the CF Moto, but it had more character, it had more brawn, it had more sensation of wanting to give its power than the CF Moto. So I'd probably save myself the, £2,500 and get the Benelli over the CF Moto. That'd be my personal opinion. There's less kit on that Benelli. You don't get the cruise control and the heated seat and the heated grips, but for me, it had enough going for it to warrant me choosing it over the CF Moto. So I rode back on the Vstrom 800, and I rode into the dark. It was a 3.5 hour journey back to North Devon. On the motorway, I mean, the bike is always wanting to go. The engine, I don't know how the only rate at 83 brake horsepower, it's almost like the spec sheet really does a disservice to this bike and to this engine, because it just always wants to go, and it's always feels like it's got power in reserve. It's as fast a bike as I would want to ride in the UK and keep a licence and keeping alive. It feels faster than an Africa Twin. It felt faster than that 790 Adventure Dave's that I rode. It felt faster than the CF Moto. It feels like a cracking engine that's always giving power. Low down, mid-range, top end. It's always wanting to go. I mean, it would easily see treble figures plus 20 miles an hour easy on a motorway, theoretically. It is just a fast bike mated to a fast chassis. And it's a phenomenal piece of engineering. And it's just quite interesting that Suzuki's product development have not listened or maybe asked the questions to find out why people bought V-Stroms or didn't buy V-Stroms. And they seem, to me at least, omitted one of the biggest selling points of V-Stroms at days of old, and that was value proposition and good levels of kit, so two things. And it seems to have been stripped back out of this, and it even seems to have been stripped back out of the RE version, which leaves the V-Strom, the hard bike, to sell, which was my initial thoughts on it when I first got the bike. How do you sell a bike that's not cheap, that hasn't got a load of kit going on it, and hasn't got a sexy badge? And the answer is you're going to struggle, which is a shame, because, as I say, as a piece of engineering, as an engine, as a chassis and an engine, I'd be struggling. I can't imagine there's a better bike in this class. And so I would say, if you're after a V-Strom, buy a CF Moto 800. If you're after a Tenere 700 or a Touareg or a KTM 890, ride a V-Strom, because I think this is going to be far more exciting than you would ever thought it was going to be, and it's got all those virtues of attributes of a Suzuki, i.e. being dependable. The seat height's also manageable, about 840mm. I never seem to struggle on it. I find it nice and easy to get the feet down. It doesn't feel weighty. And then it's got that engine. That engine just wants to give and give and give. So if I was to buy a bike out of the two, sensibly, I'd get the CF Moto. I didn't think it was a great bike, and as I say, sort of like a rough photocopy of a 790, which just lacks something in the copying process. But it does offer a hell of a lot of bike for the money. But as everything, you've got to go out and ride one. And then at some point, you've got to take a punt, choose a bike that sort of ticks as many boxes as you've got, and then ride it. And only riding it will you really find out whether it is the bike for you or not. And hopefully you've made the right decision, but maybe you've not, you know. And then those questions of resale value and all that will come into play. But I do think the connection now with CF Moto and KTM will really strengthen CF Moto's saleability. And then obviously we've got the 450 MT coming through, which if the confirmed price or the rumoured price of 5799 is true, and it's going to be out late March, I mean, that is going to blow everything out of the water. I mean, I'm looking at CRF 300 Rally there, it's nearly £1,000 less than that. It's going to be the same price as the Himalayan, but it's got more power than both. Tubeless spoke wheels, twin cylinder, you know, it could be a game changer, that CF Moto 450, which will help inflate the reputation of the brand and then all the other bikes in that brand. The CF Moto have also got a 1250 coming out based on the old Duke engine. So it's almost like the relationship is meaning that CF Moto can use the last generation of engines, so 790, 1250 rather than the 1290. This 450 is an entirely different beast. It doesn't seem to be a KTM engine, certainly not one that KTM have put out to the market. So I think the 450 could be the bike that really propels CF Moto into the established brand league of manufacturers. So interesting times. But this Suzuki, somebody asked me, what's the headlight like? It is terrible. It is a terrible headlight. And that sums up this bike. How are you developing a bike with all those years of experience of developing bikes with such a terrible headlight, with such terrible attention to what the market is requesting in a product, but yet still managing to build a brilliant product? There is some part of this, which is not, some part of Suzuki who is just not listening. And I think that is true of many manufacturers. They are just not listening to what the buyers are asking for. And curiously, the Chinese are. So who's doing it to who? Who is killing the golden goose? Is it the goose, or is it the Chinese? And I think the goose is allowing the Chinese to do the culling quite easily by this Vstrom being such a non-Vstrom, if that makes sense. You know, it needed DR big. It needed DR big on this tank, and it needed a Vstrom badge on a bike that got tubeless wheels, it got cruise control, it got a proper screen and cockpit. Because even that RE cockpit with screen, it still does not make it a proper touring bike. So yeah, interesting week. Cheers.